2, 1.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly McKay. I'm the program coordinator for Andover Elder Services, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on this snowy Tuesday afternoon. I'd like to let you know that this is a webinar, so your camera and your microphone are off if you're an attendee. So we cannot see you, so don't worry. But you can use that chat function at the bottom of your screen, and John will be taking questions at the end, so we can answer any questions then. And we're recording this for Andover Elder Services, and this is also on Andover TV, just so you know, because we can give you permission to speak at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome John Root to do his presentation on attracting birds, butterflies, bees, and other beneficials. So thank you so much for being here, John.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here. And you all can see me briefly now, but I'm about to stop my video because I want you to focus on the screen. So I am now sharing. So this program is supported in part by a grant from the Andover Cultural Council, a local agency supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. And we acknowledge that that we are now living on land that that Native Americans once occupied. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. And I can relate to these photos because I too love to gather plants for foraging purposes, edible wild plants. I've been doing that for decades now. On the left, you'll see some Native American women gathering buffalo berries, and on the right, someone who's gathering herbs for medicinal purposes. So what are beneficials, that name in the title that you saw? Organisms that help gardeners and farmers. So those include pollinators, predators, and parasites. The predators and parasites are both controlling pest populations naturally. This is called integrated pest management in the business, but you might as well think of it as intelligent pest management. Pollination is for the purpose of genetic diversity, because when you think about all the effort and energy that plants expend to lure bees and other pollinators to the flowers and to provide all that nectar, there's got to be a reason, and that reason is so that the pollen will be brought by the animal inadvertently. Of course, the animal's not trying to do that, and then deposited on the pistil of the other flower, which is the female organ right there in the middle. And in that way, the pollen grain then has to grow all the way down to the seed in the ovary at the base, and then fertilization takes place. So that assures that every new seed that's created will be a unique individual, which might have differences that improve the plant in some way compared to the parent population. 88% of all plants in the world need pollinators to set seed. The other ones are wind pollinated. Pollinators make a difference to crops, as you can see. With open pollination there, you have a nice healthy strawberry. But with passive pollination, self-pollination, if the pollinators are excluded, not much happens. And with self-pollination plus some wind pollination, we'll bring a few pollen grains in, but it's really the pollinators that are going to give you that nice healthy fruit. 1/3 of our food is pollinated. So here's a gallery of predators. They are a means of natural control of garden pests and an alternative to using pesticides, but there's some other alternatives as well. You can use barriers such as floating row covers. You can plant companion plants next to the plants that help them to be healthier. You can pick those noxious insects off yourself if you want to do it. And then organic methods as well, organic pesticides rather, are available. Predators include hummingbirds, songbirds, and other birds, and bats among the vertebrates. And they also include spiders and praying mantises. People often think of the praying mantis as being a great predator, but spiders and praying mantises are both generalist predators. They'll catch and eat anything they can find, whereas some others like syrphid flies, assassin bugs, gall midges, fireflies, ladybugs, and pirate bugs, they will all be really more specifically focusing on those pest populations and doing probably more good than the spiders and praying mantis would. But they're all part of nature, and they're all useful in their own way. Parasites are also controlling pest populations naturally, and here's that tiny trichogramma wasp in the upper left-hand corner, actually laying its eggs in the egg of another insect. And even though it's so tiny, its eggs will grow and kill the egg of the host. And the braconid wasp and ichneumon wasp are doing the same, laying their eggs in the either in this case the adult aphid, or over here the caterpillar, and will then kill that host, and the host will be used for its own eggs to grow. Soil life is also beneficial and essential, by the way, even though you can't see a lot of it. All of these are microscopic, but they are indispensable. Bacteria, actinomycetes, fungi, algae, protozoa, nematodes, they're all making that, they're all passing nutrients back and forth, eating each other, and cycling the nutrients, and also doing good things for the texture, aerating the soil. And some of them are actually quite intimately associated with plants. So ask any plant, they would not want to live in soil that's sterile. And then there's the larger picture of a variety of visible but still fairly small critters that are doing their work and leading their lives in the organic debris, in the leaf litter, that sort of thing. So if you have these populations, you're actually doing well, because the whole idea of an organic garden, organic landscaping, is that the more the merrier. You have these organisms that later on that the birds and the pollinators well, the pollinators, of course, are visiting plants which are healthier in this kind of environment, and the predators will have something to eat. As for snails and slugs, by the way, you see them in this photo. When they're provided with their favorite food, which is decaying plant and animal matter, they perhaps won't be as insistent on eating the plants that you've planted as a gardener. So the idea really is to provide them with what they need, and population control, not eradication, is really the most essential part of being an organic gardener. You have some patience, you have some tolerance for an occasional nibble here or there, but keeping your plants healthy is really the key. Now, perhaps you've seen this rather alarming news. It came out a couple years ago that a study was done in Germany. 75% of all insects had been lost over the course of a half century. So only 1/4 remained. And that seems to be true for the entire world. The population of insects is declining drastically, and that's not a good thing. So a world without insects would be a flowerless world with silent forests. We already learned about pollination and how important that is. And because they wouldn't be decomposing, we'd have dung and old leaves and rotting carcasses accumulating, and we'd also have a collapse of the entire ecosystems, spiraling from the predators to the plants. So here, this graph shows the decline of reptiles and birds and amphibians, mammals, and land vertebrates as a whole. So these are all vertebrates. And you can see that in each case, there's been significant decline. And then in addition to the insects that I already mentioned. Elizabeth Colbert, an author of The Sixth Extinction, which we are now in, she says, once global warming is something that most people can feel in the course of their daily lives, it will be too late to prevent much larger, potentially catastrophic changes. Now, this fellow, Richard Louv, is one of my favorite authors, and he, in spite of, he is certainly familiar with the problems, but he's also hopeful. And his books focus on how important nature is to us, both to children, The Last Child in the Woods, and to adults. The Nature Principle is another book that he wrote, which describes how Nature's benefits include boosting mental acuity and creativity, promotes health and wellness, builds smarter and more sustainable businesses, communities, and economies, strengthens human bonds. This is all just from being outside and connecting with nature, which is quite remarkable that nature has all these effects. And in Japan, they've learned that it also has the effect of significantly helping to reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. And doctors actually prescribe what they call forest bathing or shinrin yoku as nature therapy to people who are stressed about living in our modern world, and they just need to get back to nature on occasion, as we all know from our own experience. What a wonderful experience! What a wonderful connection that is. So now let's focus on birds. They do a wonderful job of pest control. They also disperse seeds. Without birds and other animals doing seed dispersal, the plant would have no way of really spreading its range. And they're also responsible for carrion cleanup. Crows and turkey vultures do that job, and they inspire us. You know, there's so much art and literature and poetry, photography. Nature really inspires us all. So birds in particular have declined by 3 billion, almost 3 billion since the 1970s. That's a decline of about 30%. And 2/3 of North America's birds could be gone by 2100. So Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring in 1962, warning about this calamity that could happen with indiscriminate use of pesticides. That DDT was the problem at the time. And agricultural pesticides still kill 67 million birds in the US every year. Neonicotinoids, sometimes they're called neonics for short, are a major culprit. So we really need to make sure that our government stops the availability, which the European Union has in fact done. Now, window collisions kill 300 million to 1 billion birds in the US every year. You can see that the birds just mistakenly believe, understandably, that when they see that reflection, well, that just must be more a continuation of the outdoors. So they're not, it doesn't occur to them that if they fly in that direction, they will in fact meet an irresistible barrier. So there are different things you can do to your windows so that they won't appear to be a continuation of the outdoors to birds. And at the bottom of these slides, you'll see resources. By the way, if you don't have time to copy down notes about things you want to remember, you'll be able to simply send me an email message, and I will provide you with them at the end of the program. So don't worry about doing all that note taking. Up to 1 billion birds die each year in the US when they collide with buildings, especially glass covered or illuminated skyscrapers. So as a society, we really need to stop having so much unnecessary illumination. Cats, outdoor cats kill many, many birds. One of the major causes of bird predation, of bird population decline. And if you want an extra incentive to keep your house cat indoors, remember that they are themselves prey to a number of animals out in nature. Or in my own case, I remember when we had an outdoor cat, it would get the worst end of some tussles with other cats and come home injured. And so we learned our lesson about that. Now, habitat loss, including industrial agriculture, residential development, and commercial development, is certainly the major, or perhaps one of the major reasons why bird populations have shrunk. But there's also climate change, which affects all nature, including us: drought, wildfires, flooding, and seasonal changes. So we can do our part then to provide what birds and really all animals need: food, water, shelter, and places to rear their young. What they don't need, by the way, in terms of food, is they don't need junk food, which virtually all baked goods, which are heavily processed and contain things they don't want and don't have enough of the things they do need, like protein and fat. Angel wing deformity is a result of birds being fed too much of this kind of processed food. So approved foods for songbirds include apples, bananas, cooked pasta and rice, eggshells, hard cheese, peas, corn, oats, chopped lettuce, melon, pumpkin, and squash seeds. I've been enjoying doing that this winter, putting out squash seeds for the birds. Squirrels like it too, by the way. Peanut butter and raisins. These are all approved foods for songbirds. You can do a do-it-yourself bird feeder, by the way. as you can see in these illustrations. You can also, how about this for an umbrella keeping the rain off and letting birds dine in comfortable dryness, even during a rainstorm. So there are open feeders, which do need to be cleaned more regularly, perhaps, because of course birds can defecate in them, and they let all the birds in. They're convenient, certainly. And then there's more closed feeders. There's they're the tube feeders. Incidentally, in some of these cases, you see this mix of seed. There's sunflowers in there, sunflower seeds, but there's others that are not. Generally, birds prefer all sunflower seed. Squirrel baffles can help you keep those squirrels away from the food that you intend for the birds. There are also squirrel-proof bird feeders that you can get. And a window feeder can be seen as a kind of a squirrel-proof feeder as well. If the squirrels, of course, can't reach it, sometimes they can, as you might find out for yourself. But boy, is it thrilling to have the birds come right to your window. Another advantage of window feeders is that you have the reminder right there. Oh, it needs to be cleaned. I'll do that. They might also be a good way to keep your feeder from the bears. All feeders should be at least 10 feet off the ground. They should be 10 feet from anything that bears can climb, and keep the area under the feeder clean. Now, if you want to make your own homemade suet, here is a recipe, and you can go to audubon.org to find it. I did this year, and woodpeckers love the suets, as do some other birds. So it doesn't have to be all these ingredients, by the way, but I just heated up the shortening and the peanut butter together in a saucepan, and then added the other ingredients, and then put them in the freezer, all the ingredients together, and then put them in that ice cube tray and put that in the freezer. And then, I had ice cubes of suet that I then filled my suet feeder with. And I wanted to mention also that 50 degrees is the maximum temperature for suet. It can start to spoil after that. Give birds water for bathing and drinking. And here again, we can see some economical ways to provide that. Heated bird baths are very much appreciated by birds. In the winter, they can often have difficult time finding water to drink. So you can put one of those units in the bird bath, which will keep it liquid. And bird boxes, there are some things that you need to be aware of if you want to build your own. And you'd see this birdhousesallbirds.com at the bottom of the slide. It will give you information about every one of these birds and more besides. It'll give the box floor dimension, the box height dimension, entrance height, entrance diameter, and the placement height, where the bird box itself should be in relation to the ground. All these are details that you should know about. Now, there's some unwanted visitors. Both starlings and house sparrows are invasive. They were not here pre-Columbus, and they certainly have made themselves home to the detriment of other birds. They can both these species can be quite vicious to our native birds and therefore affect their populations. They are not protected, so you have the right to harass them in any way you want, or to trap them, or whatever you can think of to do. And here's nestwatch.org gives you some ideas about how to do that. Here's a box that I made, a Peterson Bluebird box, that I think has some wonderful features. One of them has that metal baffle on top, which protects the birdhouse from staying wet, which of course causes rot. Otherwise, that birdhouse made out of pine is going to last a few years, and that'll be it. It'll start to fall apart. But with a baffle, it's guaranteed for a lifetime. That box will keep its integrity. And also, you want your birdhouses to have an opening. One side opens freely so that you can then clean it and check it. In this case, you might want to see if any of those house sparrows have come in, and then you want to remove their nest material if they have. Here's some things that you do not want to do. You don't want to have bird houses with bright colors. The reason for this is that attracts predators, attracts their attention. And a perch on a bird box is totally unnecessary. Birds do not use it. They can easily fly right to the hole and climb in without any perch. And the perch, all the perch does is it provides purchase for a predator to then access the birds and make it easier for them to do that. So avoid those two things. And then squirrels have a way of enlarging the holes so they can get in. And they have sharp and strong teeth. So in order to protect birdhouses from squirrels, any of these barriers will do to keep them inaccessible to squirrels. Adult birds eat animal protein, a lot of insects and sometimes other small vertebrates for that matter. Even this bluebird is capable of capturing and eating small vertebrates from time to time. They often love fruit and they eat seeds as well. Those are the three main items of their diet. And caterpillars are nature's premier baby food. That black-capped chickadee you see is going to have to find 6,000 to 9,000 of those caterpillars to feed her brood of chicks and raise them and fledge them. That's a lot of caterpillars. So, and the reason, I mean, their ideal baby food is they're soft, they're easily digestible, and they have all the nutrients that those chicks need. So Doug Tallamy, the author of these two books I'm showing here, Bringing Nature Home is the one that really has, he's really gotten a lot of fame for. And he knows, he's a scientist, he knows a lot about caterpillars. And so he was able to document that so many of the plants that you establish on your property that are native will attract caterpillars. The caterpillars know how to eat native plants. That's the bottom line. If you have non-native or exotic plants, and unfortunately in our landscape about 70% of what people plant is exotic. You know, people buy things that they like the appearance, they buy it from nurseries, perhaps they even like the idea that caterpillars won't eat the leaves of their plants. But the problem with that is that the birds are essentially starving. That's one of the main reasons for the bird decline. So the more, and Doug Tallamy was able to demonstrate that the more native vegetation you have, the more caterpillars of all different kinds of species will be attracted. So here's a list of trees and shrubs to plant for birds. And primarily this is all about you know, the fruit, but it's not always because of the fruit. The best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds, a starter list from allaboutbirds.org, which is Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology website. And the #1 tree is oaks. Yes, blue jays can eat those acorns, but that's not the reason why birds love this plant. As a whole, birds are attracted to oak trees because there's so many insects. Remember, oak is a native tree and it's been around for a long time, and the insects have figured out how to eat oak leaves. And the oak tree is still nice and healthy. It can spare a few pieces of leaf here and there. But what this means is that there are just hundreds of different kinds of caterpillars, and uncountable numbers of caterpillars that will be visiting an oak tree in a given season. And that makes it very popular for birds, especially birds that are nesting and need those caterpillars for their chicks. Mulberry is a tree with delicious fruit. I can testify to that. I love the taste of mulberries myself. It's a messy tree. You don't want to put it so that the fruit is overhanging your, or the, you know, that the branches are overhanging your driveway or sidewalk or something. You'd rather put it out in a corner somewhere in your backyard, perhaps, where you won't worry about the mess that's being created, but the birds will certainly flock to it. You'll be astounded at about the variety and quantity of birds that comes to visit a mulberry tree. A sassafras tree is also quite popular. The fruits are eaten by eastern kingbirds, flycatchers, phoebes, wild turkeys, gray catbirds, northern flickers, pileated woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, thrushes, wrens, and northern mockingbirds. Juneberry, another tree that birds just go, they're very excited and just relish the taste of these fruits. And so do I. Those fruits that you see, and perhaps you've never tasted a Juneberry, if you do have a chance to taste them, you will, I think, agree with me that they're just as delicious as blueberries. And you can also see that at any season of the year, this is a beautiful tree. It's a small tree. One of the problems of of actually having a chance to taste those fruits is that the birds get them before the humans in many cases. But sometimes in urban settings, I've been able to feast on June berries. Elderberry is another one of my favorite fruits. Again, this is edible for humans, perhaps not for eating raw, but if you cook with them, I love elderberry pancakes. But again, the birds just really flock to this shrub. In fact, it has wonderful health benefits for us humans. So, you know, it's nice when we have a variety of motivations to plant something. You can plant it for the birds. You can also plant it for yourself. One of the main benefits, in my view, is when you have a cold or the flu, it's the best thing to take, better than anything you can get over the counter, elderberry syrup. As soon as I feel a cold coming on, I go to my refrigerator and get that bottle of elderberry syrup out, and it really does the trick. Any kind of viburnum will produce, and there are many varieties, many species. They're beautiful in all seasons, as you can see, and they're quite appealing to, those fruits are quite appealing to the birds, as are the fruits of gray dogwood and red osier dogwood and white dogwood. And you see the get free 10 free trees information, arborday.org. You can make a donation of any amount you choose, and they will send you 10 free trees. And you could get 10 white dogwood trees. You could get 10 of a variety of different trees or different conifers. The list is, there are about 10 different selections you can make, and they won't be all that big. But if you are patient, that would be a good way for you to start your creating a nature sanctuary, a bird sanctuary. Spice bush is another wonderful tree for birds. It has a 50% fat content, which birds need. It attracts blue jays, thrushes, tanagers, and also the swallowtail caterpillar, the swallowtail spice bush swallowtail caterpillar can only eat spice bush or sassafras leaves in order to grow up and become an adult spice bush swallowtail. Staghorn sumac, beautiful tree, as you can see. It's a shrub, and those berries are very appealing to birds. And into the late fall and even winter, those fruits are still available. Hawthorn, a member of the rose family. Those flowers are the five-petaled flowers are a signature characteristic of rose family. Rosaceae is the name of the family. It really is helpful to learn some botany when you're a gardener and when you're planning to do natural landscaping, because then you'll kind of get more familiar with the qualities and the characteristics of these plants. So hawthorn fruits are good for us as well in a variety of ways. And in fact, here's another list. It continued of the things that hawthorn berries can do. And you can help yourself to those fruits and make them into, you can eat them raw or make them into tea, jams and desserts, vinegar, supplements, or a tincture. Crabapple. Birds will flock to a crabapple tree to polish off the fruit. How about winterberry holly, which is now, those fruits are still there, available to wildlife. In the spring, as you can see, that bumblebee right there attracted to the flowers. This is one of those trees that, one of those plants that you have to plant a male and a female, because without the male there, the female flowers won't get pollinated and you won't get those beautiful red berries that the birds relish. This is also true of holly. You would need male holly plants, holly trees, in order to pollinate the female. The holly attracts bluebirds and other thrushes, woodpeckers, catbirds, thrashers, and mockingbirds. Black cherry and chokecherry, very popular with birds. I like them myself. High bush blueberry and low bush blueberry. Again, many people who grow blueberry discover that they need to protect them from the birds if they want any for themselves. Now here's one of my favorite plants, Aronia. It's also called black chokeberry, a name that I don't really care for because it sounds kind of insulting. Actually, those fruits are delicious if you cook with them. Uh, chokeberry or Aronia, I like to call it Aronia pancakes. Wonderful. Now here you're seeing a list of qualities of the plant, a description of the plant, and you'll find all this information, which is, as you can see, useful to know, at MissouriBotanicalGarden.org. So whenever I'm wanting to learn something about a plant, I'll just type into the search bar Missouri and the plant's name, whether it's the common name or the Latin name. And then the first choice that'll come up there in my search is MissouriBotanicalGarden.org. You'll find this and other information about that plant. Incidentally, there are also wonderful health benefits for Aronia. WebMD.com is a good source for learning about them and other plants. Red chokeberry is a close cousin of the black chokeberry, and stunningly beautiful and also attractive to birds. Birds like blackberries, they like black raspberries. Northern bayberry will hold on to its fruit into the winter, and birds certainly appreciate that when they're hungry. And the conifers are wonderful in terms of offering protection, screen, a shelter during the winter, a place to roost, sometimes a place to nest. There might be several nests in one tree. They also can attract insects, which are edible for birds, and also, like white pine, for example, 200 different kinds of caterpillars, of butterflies and moths. Again, that's a feast for the birds. Eastern red cedar, these fruits are also edible for birds. Now, if you've chosen a tree or a shrub that you want, and you want to put it you're ready to put it in the ground, you have to get an extra wide hole, but don't dig it any deeper than necessary. Also, keep the topsoil and subsoil in separate piles. So when you start to get, just kind of scrape the topsoil off and put it in one pile, and then dig the subsoil out and put it in a separate pile, because you want to then replace the subsoil first, and then the topsoil last when you're filling up the hole again. You want to resist the temptation to put in a lot of compost or feed the tree in that way, because that will discourage the tree from sending roots farther away from the hole. Tree roots and shrub roots generally go outwards much more than they go down. So in order for that plant to establish itself, you want those tree roots to be growing laterally and searching for nutrients, rather than providing them free of charge right there in the hole, which will disincentivize them from growing laterally. Place the plant in the ground, loosen the burlap or remove it, and then return the subsoil and topsoil to fill the hole. Then you want to surround it with mulch, but not right up to the trunk, and create a rim around it so that when it rains, the water will gather in that basin that you've created. And on the right, you'll see a properly mulched tree. The mulch is well away from the trunk, and it's if you can get it all the way out to the drip line, well, that's a great way to reduce the competition of the grass growing in your lawn, because grass will be competing for nutrients. You don't want the mulch to be too coarse, because weeds can easily grow through it. You don't want it too deep. 3 to 4 inches is more than enough. And you certainly don't want to have one of those volcano mulches that you sometimes see piled up around the trunk, because that will encourage root growth. Virginia creeper is appealing. This is a vine, which is appealing to birds. These berries are toxic to humans, which just goes to show that birds can eat some things that we cannot. There are 2 different kinds of wild grapes. Birds love them both, riverbank and fox grape. Here's an example of just a sampling of the different kinds of birds that will come to feed on wild grape. You notice at the bottom of the slide here, faunal associations, IllinoisWildflowers.info. You can find a lot of interesting and detailed information on any plant that you're interested in, to learn which animals, including birds, would be attracted to that plant. Here's another vine that's attractive to birds. Here's the mockingbird and catbird featured, because not only will they eat the fruit of this limber honeysuckle, but they'll also nest in it and use it for shelter. One of my favorite ground covers is bearberry. It does need full sun, but it's not just bears that eat those fruits. And they hold on to their fruit the longest and can be a welcome sight to a hungry bird in late winter. Sunflower seeds, of course, are popular with birds. And if you grow sunflowers, they surely will come unless the squirrels and chipmunks get to them first. Black-eyed Susan is a related plant, and it too has edible seeds, as do purple coneflowers. And here are some more plants that have edible seeds for birds. Now, I mentioned that it can be good to learn your botany. All these plants, except for the sedum, are in the aster family. Asteraceae is the name of that family. And each of these flowers is composed of a number of different, perhaps hundreds of different florets, tiny flowers that are all packed together. So the things that you see that look like petals, each one of those is actually a separate flower, and its petals have been fused. Those are called the ray flowers. And then there are also the disc flowers that are in the center. Each one of those flowers has its own reservoir of nectar. So pollinators are able to visit one of the what we call flowers and just go from floret to floret, staying on that same flower, because each one of those florets has its own nectar reservoir. Leave your seed stalks standing over the fall because they will provide that nourishment to birds. And in the spring, after you've had a period of warm weather, then you can go ahead and cut them back. Also, leave the leaves. So this is important wherever you can, wherever it's permissible in terms of your aesthetics and the function of your landscape. There are a lot of insects and other invertebrates that will make their homes. Butterflies, will overwinter there, and so it'll give some survival to those invertebrates and also to the birds. Leave dead trees and snags. They are used as nesting sites and also as sources of food for a variety of birds. And create brush piles. If you can put a brush pile out of sight where it won't look unsightly to you. So many animals, both large and small, will appreciate brush piles as a source of both shelter and nourishment. So you don't see too much habitat in this picture, although perhaps that tree might be a native tree. But we kind of have a standard for ourselves that we seem to feel the need to groom our outside to the extent that there's just nothing, no wildlife there. And it all goes back to the 17th century when the aristocracy wanted to demonstrate to the world that they were certainly not peasants. They didn't need to use their land to grow food. And so they could show off how rich they were to use their land for nothing at all but grass. And then they hired people to cut it. So that tradition has stayed with us. And, I appreciate lawns for what they can do. There are certain things that lawns are good for, but we have far too much of it. And so this is the kind of propaganda that we're all kind of used to being exposed to, that the best lawn is one that looks like this. But that kind of lawn is a food desert. It's a polluter often if it's being treated, in which it pretty much has to be to look like this, and a resource guzzler. So the alternative just the consumption of goods and the effects on the environment are just unacceptable. And why would you want to spend all that money to have something that's not doing anything for wildlife? So reducing wild lawns by at least 25% is a reasonable goal for many of us. And now this Pennsylvania State University produced this resource here about natural landscaping. You can see the options given on the left hand there for natural landscaping, on the right more conventional. And but they felt that they had to answer certain myths that are concerns that people have about natural landscaping. For example, about them being fire hazards. But the fact is, a grass fire can only sustain high heat for 20 seconds. Natural landscapes do not attract vermin because the vegetation does not sustain rats. Lyme disease ticks do not need to be a concern either if you put setbacks or paths for walking and make sure that you're not brushing against the plants that might harbor ticks. I also invite you to check out lymedisease.org for other ideas about how to prevent ticks in your yard. You can also apply tick repellents, any product containing 20 to 30% of these 4 ingredients. Prevention.com is a source where you can learn more about tick repellents. And also where you can learn about treating clothing and gear with permethrin. And if you treat it at least 48 hours before use, it actually does not just repel, it actually kills ticks, mosquitoes, chiggers, mites, and ticks and other insects. And it's non-toxic. It lasts through 6 washings or through 70 washings if your clothing is factory treated. Bonds with fabric, doesn't harm the fabric, and is odorless after it dries. It's not true that natural landscapes have to be breeding grounds for mosquitoes. In fact, they don't have long-standing puddles in general. Now, if you do have a pond, you can control the mosquito larvae in your pond with mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, which have BTI, which is a bacterium, which will kill those. And then there's also mosquito fish that will prey on the mosquito larvae. And you can keep water in motion with a solar-activated pump. Buglord.com is a resource to learn more about controlling mosquito larvae. Another myth, allergenic pollen will be produced in a natural landscape. The fact is that non-native plants and grasses are the ones to blame for producing the most allergenic pollen. And here is a rogues gallery of these plants: allergenic weeds, ragweed, lamb's quarters, red root amaranth, English plantain. By the way, lamb's quarters and amaranth are 2 of my favorite edible wild plants when they're younger, but at the stage when they're sending out their pollen, they're not appealing to me, and they can be problematic. Allergenic grasses, timothy grass, ryegrass, sweet vernal grass, and orchard grass, they too are sending their pollen out on the wind. And some trees, these are just 6 of them that can be problematic. Generally, someone who has allergies is only allergic to one plant, one tree, but it could be that you're allergic to more. So another myth, natural landscapes lower property values because they are messy and unattractive. Well, of course, it all depends on how you do it, but a well-landscaped property can certainly enhance property values. In fact, just planting a single large and stately tree over the years, when it looks the way it can, and it's a nice healthy tree, it will add thousands of dollars to your property. And just for the very insignificant expense of establishing in the first place. And certainly there might be other expenses down the road, but it still is, so it's worth the return on the investment is astounding. Now, the first step you're going to want to take when you're looking at your landscape is and deciding how you're going to create this nature sanctuary. Get rid of those invasive plants. They are going to interfere with the plants that you want to establish. And you really want to do your best at eradicating them, but please use natural methods to do so. And one way, of course, is just to uproot them, or you can just ruthlessly keep cutting them back until they lose their vitality. And but all of these really, many of them were introduced by the nursery trade and sold because they're appealing in one way or another, but they've made themselves very unwelcome by displacing the native plants that are so important to keep our ecosystems intact. Poison ivy, by the way, even though it certainly is not a plant that you want to allow on your property where you're actually going to be in contact with it. In the woods, it's not a problem. It's actually a native plant, and birds feed on the berries. If you want to get rid of poison ivy or anything else, the lawn, for example, for planting your native landscaping, sheet mulching is a great way to go. You cut back the existing vegetation as close as possible. You give it a close cropping. Cover it with cardboard or newspaper overlapping so that nothing will be able to poke through. And then mulch on top. If you're if you're doing sheet mulching for a garden, you want to put as much fertility in there as possible. You might want to have a layer of compost, but it's not necessary for natural landscaping. You can, if you don't have enough boxes, you can buy this cardboard roll called Ramboard. Commercially, you can order it and it'll be delivered to you. Here you'll see, in this case, the landscapers have actually cut holes in the Ramboard and are inserting the plants before they put the mulch around the planting. So, and one thing that you have to know when you're doing your design is how much will those plants grow? You don't want them crowding each other. That's one of the major mistakes that people make in their landscape design is just planting things too closely and creating problems down the road. Mulch is wonderful for keeping in the moisture and keeping out the weeds, also for preventing erosion, for keeping the soil cool, for keeping all that wonderful soil life happy, because it adds to the fertility of the soil. There are different kinds of mulch you can use depending on what kinds of beds you're establishing. Annual beds are for your vegetables and that sort of thing. Grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves, pine straw are all great. Pine straw does not make the soil acidic, by the way, and you can research that online if you'd like. Perennial beds, perhaps it's better to use pine bark, sawdust, wood chips, chip branch wood, but the pine straw would also be a fine mulch to use here. This is what chip branch wood means. If you chip branches with a chipper, this is different from wood chips because you're only using branches, not the wood itself. Branches perhaps less than 3 inches in diameter. That way you get some of that nitrogen along with the carbon in the wood. It's a great mulch to use for any bed, whether it's annual or perennial. You want to mulch smart. Number one, avoid dyed mulch because it's often contaminated with creosote and chromated copper arsenate. So it's not the dye per se, but the pallets, the wood pallets, and the kinds of wood that's used in the dyed mulch often is contaminated with these chemicals that can cause problems to the plants and to the wildlife. Don't overuse. I mentioned the volcano mulch. As you can see, that when that mulch decomposes, it leaves exposed roots and is unhealthy for the tree. A properly mulched tree is shown at the bottom of the photo, where the mulch is pulled away from the base a little bit, and you just don't need that mountain of mulch. However, mulch, if piled on too much, also can favor pests. It gives them a place to seek refuge, and weeds sometimes can still grow through mulch. So why not think in terms of filling up space with plants instead of mulch? That really should be your goal eventually. This is a rain garden. You can see the stones leading from it where the water would continue to flow in the event of rain. Think about ground covers as being a living mulch. They do all these functions just as mulch do. They prevent weeds, retain moisture, they keep the soil cool, and what mulch may not do is hold the soil in place on slopes. I mentioned bearberry as being one of my favorite mulches, favorite ground covers. It's an evergreen, it's a beautiful plant, and it does a good job of, once it's established, you just never need to worry about it again. No management. Thyme is wonderful for bees, and you can include it in your lawn if you're able to establish thyme. It's just little patches in your lawn. It can be one of those lawn flowers. 3-leaved cinquefoil, a beautiful ground cover in the rose family. Dwarf crested iris can be a ground cover. So can creeping phlox, golden star, green and gold. Wild ginger is good for the shade. Another shade plant is bishop's hat with beautiful foliage as well as flowers. Allegheny pachysandra, I think it's a native version of pachysandra that I think is more attractive than the customary Japanese species. Barren strawberry with the yellow flowers instead of white, and there are no fruits, but in other ways it reminds you of a strawberry foliage. And strawberry itself can be an effective ground cover, as you can see in the lower left, as a lawn substitute. Well, now let's think about attracting hummingbirds. the ruby-throated is the only hummingbird that you're likely to see here in New England. In fact, we've had a 110% increase in their population. So this is one bird that we're not concerned about. But people nonetheless certainly enjoy hummingbird company, and there's no reason why you can't welcome them to your land. Provide moving water, they love it. Provide snags for perches, just like other birds. They like to survey their territory. Leave dead trees, because the yellow-bellied sapsucker and pileated woodpecker will use them, and then the hummingbird can come in and help itself to the insects that are attracted to the sap that is flowing from those holes. Welcome webs, because the hummingbirds need them to make their nests. Here's some more nesting material that they will use. Incidentally, a remarkable thing about hummingbirds, their nest will expand by a factor of 2. It'll be double its size because those chicks will grow. And as they grow, the nest expands because it's flexible. It's made of the flexible spider web material. So, and don't disturb nests, because even though the hummingbirds will not smell your scent if you touch the nest, predators might. They might notice your attention, that you found something, and they'll come and check out what you found, or they might smell the odor that you've left on those nests. However, it is okay to rescue a hummingbird chick if you find it on the ground, because again, the hummingbird cannot smell, and this is true of all birds. If you find a chick, and if you know where the nest is, you can put that chick back in the nest, and the female or male in some cases will continue to care for that chick. Hummingbird feeders, if you do want to feed them with sugar water, here is a design that's easier than some other designs to clean. So it's a desirable kind of model. You can mix 1 cup water and 1/4 cup sugar, but no food coloring. They don't need to see that red liquid, because they can see the red on other parts of that bird feeder. Heat to dissolve, refrigerate, and use within 1 week. Replace the food in the feeder every few days, and then clean it every 3 days. Cleaning instructions: use hot water, but don't use soap. You scrub the sides, but soap, it would be problematic. Black mold can be an issue. Soak 1/4 cup bleach to a gallon of water for 1 hour to get rid of that black mold. So if the nectar becomes cloudy, it has spoiled and needs to be replaced. Nectar can start to ferment in just 1 day in the summer. So I hope I'm impressing on you that we don't want to love birds to death, and that can happen if you feed spoiled sugar water to birds. Hummingbirds, by the way, don't just eat nectar. They are excellent predators themselves. They eat mosquitoes, flies, gnats, ants, insect eggs, insect larvae, and spiders. And you can see in this photo, they eat insects on the wing, or they pluck them from wherever they find them, perhaps spider webs. But do consider the fact that floral nectar is guaranteed to be more nutritious than sugar water. 55% sucrose, 24% glucose, 21% fructose, just the right combination of sugars that they need, plus trace amounts of minerals, proteins, and amino acids. Here is one of their favorite flowers on the trumpet creeper. Yes, this can be a very aggressive vine. You don't want to plant it near your house. But if there's a place where you don't mind it being aggressive, hummingbirds will love it. Here's another vine that they like, trumpet honeysuckle, also called coral honeysuckle, and another vine, crossvine, which has evergreen leaves. A cardinal flower, one of their absolute favorite flowers. Hummingbirds, as you may know, love the color red. And this is a classic flower for your gardens. And some butterflies will also visit it. Wild columbine, when the hummingbirds arrive, they're hungry. They come in the spring from their migration, and here is a flower to welcome them, a native flower called wild columbine. The Canada lily comes in different colors. Turtlehead, also the white or the pink, they'll feast on either one. This is a late flowering plant. Butterfly weed. Lance leaf coreopsis. So you can see that hummingbirds will in fact visit plants that are not red once they're attracted to your garden. Obedient plant. This is an unusual plant. You can actually move the flower and it'll stay there. You can rotate it around the central stalk. very attractive to hummingbirds and other pollinators. Blazing star, another classic pollinator plant that hummingbirds like. Swamp milkweed, blue lobelia, foxglove beard tongue, an early blossoming plant. And all of these are native plants, so they belong in the landscape and they're part of the ecosystem. Purple coneflower, phlox, any species. And bats are also effective predators, just like hummingbirds. The little brown bat and the big brown bat are the two that we have the most of, or the most common species. Little brown bat has suffered greatly, and lost about 90% of its population because of white nose syndrome, a fungus that has affected them that can spread in their caves and places where they roost. So they certainly are in need of and deserve our help. You can install a bat house. You can make your own house if you like, or buy one. Mass.gov is a good resource for this, Mass Wildlife's Guide to Bat Houses. If you have bats, there are only 2 times a year that you can safely evict them, the spring and the fall. You do not want to evict them if they're raising their young. Leave dead trees standing for them. Don't use pesticides. Keep your cats indoors because they can be predators. In fact, if they find where the bats are roosting, they could decimate the population of that roost. Minimize artificial lighting because that disturbs them. Lighting at night. Minimize loud noises, especially at night. And you can plant night blooming flowers, evening primrose, phlox, night flowering catchfly, fleabane, and goldenrod are all drawing insects to them, which will in turn can be food for bats. Now, butterflies and moths are in the order called Lepidoptera. They're actually, I think, about 20 times as many moths as there are butterflies. But in this picture, because butterflies are so beautiful and popular, I'm featuring butterflies. In the upper right-hand corner, you see a Cecropia moth. Notice the wings, which look like a profile of a snake's head. So it looks like there are 2 snakes there on that, snake heads on that moth. So butterflies and moths are different. Primarily, you can tell the difference if you look at the antennae. The antennae of the moth are feather-like, and there are simple club-tipped antennae for the butterfly. In general, butterflies are active in the day, have more colorful wings, and rest with their wings in the upright position, but none of these is a guaranteed foolproof difference. But another difference that you can count on, moths spin cocoons and butterflies make chrysalises. So Polyphemus moth, now you'll see in green a list of the host plants. So the caterpillar, the Polyphemus moth, can feast on the leaves of any of those trees. You can see there's quite a list there. Luna moth, again, a variety of trees that those caterpillars can use as a host plant. And the 8-spotted forester moth caterpillar can eat the leaves of wild grape or Virginia creeper. Cecropia moth, another list of trees. And willow, I'm putting at the top because it's such a fantastic plant for so many different organisms as a host plant and as a supply of pollen and nectar in the spring. So when you plan your butterfly garden, you want a place with adequate sun, at least 6 hours a day. You want to, and you might want to establish a water source somewhere. It's not just birds that need to drink water. It's also butterflies and bees, and providing those stones for them to alight on them, the stones while they're drinking, is helpful. And keeping it clean, of course, is important. Shelter from the wind is a good idea for a butterfly garden. Host plants of different kinds. You just saw some host plants featured for the moths, and butterflies also need them. Nectar producing plants throughout the growing season. In particular, you want to make sure that in the spring and summer in your pollinator gardens, you have things growing and blooming. And use organic landscaping practices so those butterflies will be safe. Mud is something that many butterflies need. The males will sip the mud so that they are able to provide more fertility when they're mating, and the offspring will be healthier because they get those nutrients from the mud. So you can provide mud in a kind of a bird bath situation like this. call it a butterfly mud bath, but it's it's the sand from the beach is actually an excellent material because it has those nutrients in it. Let them eat fruit, and you can give them fruit that's fairly rotten and they'll still feast on it. And let them eat leaves. Tolerate a leaf here or there that's been chopped by caterpillars, because without caterpillars, we don't have butterflies. Southern species in Massachusetts have been on the rise. These three on the top: frosted elfin, giant swallowtail, zabulon, skipper. We didn't used to have hardly any of these. Now they're significantly increasing in numbers. But the species that are more common in the north, such as these two fritillaries, the Atlantis and Aphrodite, have been declining in population. That's not surprising because of climate change itself. ScienceDaily.com is the source of information about that. So here are the best host plants for attracting butterflies and moths. Goldenrod is the champion. It attracts 125 different species of butterflies and moths that it can nourish, the leaves of the goldenrod. The leaves of strawberry are number 2 at 81 different butterflies and moths. Sunflower sustains 58 different kinds of butterflies and moths, and bird's foot trefoil comes in at 32. And here is a list of other plants that have significant value for various butterfly and moth species as their host plants. Now we turn our attention to the trees, and as I mentioned, Doug Tallamy's work showed that caterpillars really feast on oak trees. Look at that number, 473, compared to, that's almost 4 times as many species of butterflies and moths that then feed on the goldenrod, which is the champion herbaceous perennial. And really high numbers too for willow at 399, birch at 393. And then here's a long list now of other trees which are quite valuable as host plants for a variety of butterflies and moths. And of course, where would birds be without them? Without those caterpillars to feed their chicks. Now here's an example of a mourning cloak, one of the earliest butterflies. And interestingly, this adult butterfly survives the winter as an adult. It finds some place to hide, and then it's able to come right out in the early spring. It's one of the first to appear. And then it feeds on sap where branches have been broken off in storms. The mourning cloak caterpillar then can eat the leaves of willows, poplars, hackberry, and elms. Spicebush swallowtails caterpillars can eat spicebush itself and sassafras. Black swallowtail caterpillars, anything in the carrot family: fennel, dill, parsley, Queen Anne's lace, and carrots. Eastern tiger, variety of trees such as willow, wild cherry, birch, and ash. Baltimore checker spot, the turtle head, the beautiful flower, blooms in the fall, and also either of these weeds, plantain, either common plantain or narrowleaf plantain that are often in your yard. Spring azure, New Jersey tea, dogwoods, viburnums, and meadowsweet all have leaves that the caterpillar can dine on. And the great spangled fritillary caterpillar uses violet leaves for its food. Common violet, common blue violet it's called, even though the flowers are purple or white, never blue, but it's called common blue violet. And it certainly is common in people's lawns. Pearl crescent caterpillars eat aster leaves. American copper caterpillars eat sheep sorrel and curly dock leaves. These are fairly common weeds. And the monarch butterfly, Danaus plexippus, perhaps the most charismatic of all butterflies. Here we see it both creating a chrysalis in the upper series of, there it is, magically transforming itself, metamorphosis, and then in this lower photo, emerging as an adult butterfly. The various instars are visible in the lower left. It starts out as an egg laid on a milkweed leaf by its mother, and then it hatches. There's the first instar, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth, and then it's ready to pupate. Common milkweed is one of their food sources, but I don't necessarily suggest that you grow common milkweed in your garden unless you're prepared for it to take off and crowd out other plants, because it sends out runners, subterranean runners, and it's kind of a bully in your garden. It's really fairly aggressive. So instead of planting common milkweed, if you want to attract and sustain monarchs, by the way, milkweed doesn't just nourish the monarchs, but a number of other visitors, pollinators, when the flowers are created, but are blooming. But butterfly weed is another milkweed that's very well behaved in the garden, and certainly beautiful. So not only does it attract the pollinators, but those leaves are good for to raise your monarch caterpillars. And so is swamp milkweed. Now, the butterfly weed can survive fairly dry situations. The swamp milkweed, as the name implies, can manage fairly moist conditions, but you'd be surprised how many gardens, either one or both, would be happy. There's quite a bit of overlap in their habitat needs. And then there's poke milkweed, which does okay in the shade. These four milkweed plants are all natives. Oh, and I also wanted to point out the Biota of North America program, Plant Atlas, bonap.net. It shows you which plants are native in your particular region. Now, monarchs populations have been in serious decline, and monarchwatch.org is an organization that is trying to advocate for them. Here are the threats to monarch butterflies that they mentioned: herbicide-resistant crops, pesticide use, climate change, logging, and development. So they encourage you to create a monarch way station. And there's a number of plants that if you plant them fairly close together, that's better for the pollinators. They don't have to go too far to find another flower of that same species if they're working on that species that's currently in bloom. So edibleterrace.com will show you the plants that they suggest for a monarch way station. You could have a raised garden for your a pollinator garden, or you could have a much larger garden, either one. You could even have a butterfly container. Container gardening, the larger the container, the better, because the soil won't dry out as readily. And at the other end of the scale, you could have wildflower meadows at least 400 square feet. So think about 20 by 20 feet would be ample, would be enough space, and it could be significantly larger. I'm suggesting wildflower meadows as a wonderful way to create habitat for butterflies and other pollinators, and that you would probably need the help of a landscape professional. It's a fairly involved process that requires that you eradicate all vegetation. That takes pretty much an entire year, and there are various ways to do that. And then you have to have a custom seed mix that includes grasses, but they have to be appropriate grasses, not the grasses that were present in your lawn. The top 15 butterfly plants offered by NABA, North American Butterfly Association, are the following. And butterfly bush is a non-native. So yes, it does nourish the adult butterflies, but it does nothing for the larvae. So some people are opposed to the idea of having butterfly bush. They would rather have all natives. New Jersey tea is a native, and so is sweet pepper bush. So you can think of these as being butterfly bush substitutes. Compass plant, blazing star, thistle, asters, purple coneflower, scabiosa, Joe Pye weed, can handle fairly wet conditions. Boneset can also be in wet places. Bee balm, different colors. Zinnia, an annual, very popular. And Mexican sunflower, another annual, quite attractive to butterflies. Marigolds likewise. So now let's look at bees. They're the best pollinators because they're hairy, they're fuzzy, that is. Wasps have little to no hair. So fuzzy bees are able to, the pollen sticks to them, and they are more effective then at bringing the pollen to the next flower. The honeybee, while it is a very important bee commercially, it actually it's not quite as good as some other native bees, and we have 400 different species of native bees. Honeybee then is in the minority, but it certainly is quite common. And their linear foraging pattern kind of delimits their capacity for outcrossing pollen. They also won't forage. They also won't go out looking for nectar and pollen in cold or rainy conditions, as some others will. A feral honeybee hive looks like this. We don't have too many of these, but they are perfectly capable of creating their own honeybee hives. And one of the main problems with honeybee hives that's actually caused population declines is the neonicotinoids. And for that reason, the European Union has banned them, and it'd be good for our country to follow their lead. A bee-centric hive, people also talk about natural beekeeping, and just to have 8 frames instead of 10 frames wide makes a difference to the bees. And there are other ways that if you're just not as impatient and you don't harvest as much honey, and let the bees then be healthier as a hive, and don't, if you don't starve them, or if there's no need to feed them sugar water to keep them alive, then you'll have healthier bees, and perhaps the honey will be tastier as well. Bumblebees are perhaps the best known native bee, and they form hives as well, but nowhere near as many individuals as a honeybee, because they have to start from the spring with a single queen. She has to do it all in the beginning. She has to feed herself, and then start the colony, and then the colony can help out once it's established. But at the beginning, it's all up to her. That's a corbicula, that yellow thing on the side of the leg right there, which is it's pollen that has been packed in with nectar. So it's almost the consistency of bread dough, and that's a lot of pollen that the honeybees and bumblebees can both collect pollen in that way and bring it back to the hive. Bumblebees can do something that honeybees can't do, which is buzz pollination. This is flowers of the tomato family. They're actually able to vibrate those anthers, and the pollen comes out the end. It's a different kind of pollination, a way of providing pollen, and only bees can get at it. So because bumblebees are so good at it, they are actually used. They are herded, if you want to use that term, in a greenhouse. They are available to those flowers and make a difference for tomato pollination. Other bumblebee pollinated crops include raspberries, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, and cucumbers. Now, turtlehead and bottle gentian are 2 flowers that bumblebees are uniquely suited to, because they actually have the strength to make their way into those blossoms, and each of these flowers give them a really generous reward of nectar. So it makes it worthwhile for the bumblebee to make that effort. You can provide a bumblebee shelter just by overturning a flower pot, and if there's a section of hose leading to it, that would be the entrance way for the bumblebee. And then cover it, and inside you can provide dry moss, or if you can find a mouse nest, that would be ideal, because the smell of the mouse nest would attract it. In the wild, bumblebees actually like to establish their homes in mouse nests. You can also find instructions on making bumblebee nesting boxes online. So leave it be landscaping is a good, logs can be left where they are if that's a possibility. Leave the leaves, as I mentioned before. Leave abandoned nests of either mouse nests or bird nests for bumblebees. And here are some plants that bumblebees will appreciate: St. John's wort, meadow sweet, wild raspberry, Carolina rose, Virginia rose, goldenrod, and Joe pye weed. Plants for short and medium-tongued bumblebees include milkweed, goldenrod, Joe pye weed, aster, boneset, buttonbush, bush honeysuckle, blue lobelia, bee balm, and dogbane. All these, Robert Jagir, who's done a lot of research about bumblebees, grownativemass.org. You'll see these lists. And then the bumblebees that have the longer tongues: turtlehead, wild yellow indigo, obedient plant, spotted touch-me-not, swamp thistle, pasture thistle, spiked lobelia, oldfield toadflax, blue flag iris, giant purple hyssop are all popular with bumblebees. Here's Robert Jagir, and you can use his Beecology citizen science app, taking pictures of bumblebees as you find them, and you can help give him information about which bumblebees are visiting which plants. And this information has been quite valuable in his research. There in fact are some insects that look like bumblebees that aren't. And by impersonating and being imposters as they are, they give themselves protection, because most birds are going to avoid trying to make a meal of a bumblebee. Blue orchard mason bees are a wild bee. They're very valuable to orchardists because they're out earlier in the spring. They can tolerate that cold weather better than honeybees, and they're much more efficient pollinators. Where it would take 90,000 honeybees to pollinate an orchard, it would take just 300 blue orchard mason bees. And this is the remarkable thing about them. They will find tubes to lay their eggs on. They make, it's called bee bread, pollen and nectar combined. And then they just deposit their egg on that bee bread. And then they'll seal up the egg chamber with mud, which they gather wherever they can find it. And then several chambers can be inside one of these tubes. Here's a leafcutter bee, remarkable bee that actually does cut these very neat circles and then flies off with them and uses them. You can see in the top row, the leafcutter bee has created its own egg chambers, brood chambers, with those circles of leaves that are rolled up and inserted in that tube. And in the middle, those are rosin bees that use tree rosin for the egg chambers. The bottom is the mason bee. You can establish bee hotels, and the Japanese knotweed stalks, which are a terribly invasive plant, but the dead stalks, when cut into sections, can be used in bee hotels. Hydrangea stalks are also useful for this purpose. Both mason bees and leafcutter bees can use these bee hotels. Sweat bees are a small bee that are actually attracted to human sweat, but you don't need to worry because they don't sting. And they're beautiful bees. They're solitary, small, harmless, ground dwelling, and generalists. About 70% of native bees are ground dwelling. And because they can use a lot of different kinds of pollen, they're quite successful. Habitat for ground nesting bees includes, or should be at least several yards across. Loose, well-drained soil is good. Flat areas or earthen banks will be suitable. It should be sunny, south-facing. Soil-filled planters can even help ground nesting bees. And stay off that area where they're nesting because you don't want to disturb them. A plasterer bee is actually able to tunnel into the soil and then fill the end of that tunnel with a cellophane bag that it creates, and then puts its bee bread at the bottom of it, lays its egg on the wall, and then seals up the bag that it's created with its own exudate from its body. A remarkable strategy. Invertebrate predators and their prey are pictured here. Spiders eat everything possible, so do praying mantises. But here are some more beneficial insects: lacewings, ladybugs. These are all predators of some of our pest insects. Fireflies. Please turn off your outdoor lights because that confuses them. Pirate bugs. Assassin bugs. Hoverflies, or also called syrphid flies, will eat aphids. Gall midges also dine on aphids. And then the microscopic beneficial nematodes are invertebrate predators in the soil. And the parasites include trichogramma wasps and braconid wasps. Now, the trees and shrubs for pollinators that I want to suggest to you are the following: pussy willow, witch hazel, both spring and fall, redbud, wonderful tree. Carnelian cherry is a kind of dogwood. American hazelnut is another early spring tree. All of the fruit trees, apples, pears, peaches, plums, cherries, will attract those pollinators, and the birds, of course. American plum is a native plum. So is beach plum. Black cherry, which we saw appealing to birds, also is great for pollinators. The Virginia or the Carolina rose. The Juneberry again. Maples and oaks, even though they don't have conspicuous flowers, are still used by pollinators. Basswood is very attractive to bees. So you see the trees and shrubs are really what you should think first when you're planning a pollinator garden, which surprises people. You know, we're used to thinking about pollinator gardens or pollinator plants as being the herbaceous plants. Blueberry flowers, red osier dogwood, any of the dogwoods, staghorn sumac, common ninebark is a magnet for pollinators, inkberry holly, winterberry holly, viburnums, any species of viburnum, any of the hydrangeas, preferably the native hydrangeas, mountain laurel, spring ephemerals, when nothing else is out in the early spring. Here you have these native plants, trout lilies, snowdrops, crocuses, providing nectar, much needed for the bees, Siberian squill, and then the native plant wild bleeding heart, both spring and fall blooms, squirrel corn, Dutchman's breeches, bloodroot, any of the trilliums, including the yellow trillium, winter aconite, wild daffodil, Lenten rose or Christmas rose, and some of the native bee magnets, which are attracting at least 9 native bee genera, include wild bergamot, attracts 15 different genera. Black-eyed Susan attracts 14 genera, 13 for boneset. And these 6 plants attract 12 different native bee genera: swamp milkweed, butterflyweed, swamp tickseed, oxeye sunflower, mountain mint, blue vervain. 11 genera of native bees will visit foxglove beardtongue, cup plant, New England aster, and golden alexanders. 10 will visit big leaf aster, wild geranium, and yellow coneflower. And then 9 different bee genera are attracted to anise hyssop, purple coneflower, Jacob's ladder, Ohio spiderwort, ironweed, and culver's root. And there are some annuals too, which are popular with pollinators, including sunflower, Mexican sunflower, zinnia, spiderflower, and culinary herbs such as basil, chives, rosemary, oregano, lavender, catmint. And I want to call your attention to Heather Holm, a scientist and an expert about pollinators, both the plants and their pollinating visitors. She has these 6 posters. I'll give you a closer look at each one for different site conditions: sandy soil, loam soil, moist soil, sun and clay soil, shade, and then finally a poster with butterfly and moth flowers that are her favorites. And she knows what she's talking about. She has such extensive experience. She's an author. Heather Holm, pollinatorsnativeplants.com. Here's a flowering calendar that you can find at the UNH, University of New Hampshire Extension Service, extension.unh.edu. Kathy Neal she's retired now, but she's a real expert on pollinator plants for northern New England, which overlaps a lot with what we have here. You will want to know, if you germinate wildflower seeds, that they have different needs, and the germination codes, the category B is the most common. Seeds often need cold stratification, which means they need a temperature of just above 32 degrees. Freezing temperature won't do it. It has to be just above 32 degrees for a certain period of time, moist and cold, and then after that, they will be able to germinate. So you can find germination requirements of seeds in an article by Bill Kalina. You can also find information at prairiemoon.com, which is a seed company. wildseedproject.com is another resource about how to grow natives from seed. You see that these plants are all growing in what looks like they're pretty crowded, but actually they're pretty happy being crowded like this. Vegetative propagation is a way to increase the number of plants you have. Sometimes you can just cut those the underneath structure into several parts, and each one of those stems will then, if you plant them and spread them out, produce its own clump. Layering is a different way to propagate vegetatively, and cuttings, surprisingly, you can often just cut a stem, put it in a pot, and it'll grow. Here's some nurseries that I suggest for obtaining native perennials. Again, I can send you these lists if you send me an email message. In fact, there's a much larger list here that you'll see where you might be able to find a nursery near you for native plants. So join a garden club. You might want to avail yourself of this service, the Tower Hill Hortline. The master gardeners will help you with any gardening question you might have. If you send them a clear plant photo for ID or diagnosis, you can either send them an email message or give them a call when they're open. Observe, learn, enjoy, and share. Make gardening something that you share with other people. You'll learn things. You can teach other people what you know. Befriend gardeners, because then you can, not only will you learn a lot, but you might be able to share plants with each other and help to grow your own collection. Invite children to be stewards of nature and foster their love and respect for nature. So I hope that you can join with me in making this pledge to bring back the pollinators, grow a variety of bee-friendly flowers that bloom from spring through fall, provide caterpillar host plants, avoid using pesticides, especially insecticides, and talk to your neighbors about the importance of pollinators and their habitat. All decisions must maximize the welfare of the unborn unto the 7th generation. We need to think about this extinction crisis and the global climate change crises, which are separate but connected, in order so that succeeding generations of humans and of wildlife will be able to coexist and thrive. And in order to do that, you might also be thinking about your individual decisions as a consumer and using restraint of your consumption of both food and non-food items, and giving away rather than discarding anything that's something someone else can use, recycling everything you can, composting all your organics, and learn what is hazardous and dispose of these materials appropriately. There is no planet B. Thank you for doing your part. And now I would be happy to receive any comments or questions.
Thank you so much, John. That was extremely informative and wonderful. I know a lot of people enjoyed it very much. I'm looking through.
Yeah.
I'm looking through. We don't have any direct questions. If anyone wants to put in the chat or the Q&A, I'm watching both. Now's the time to do so. If not, obviously, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Nope, we're just getting a few thank yous, John. You did such a great job.
I'm going to, perhaps I should remind you that if you send me an email message, I'm going to share my screen one more time so you can see my email address, info@johnroot.net. Then I can share some of that information that I whizzed through, and you'll learn so much more. And of course, you can do your own internet searches and learn information yourself and share it with me if you like.
Wendy asked if we can hear more from you, John, if we can have you back someday.
I'd love to come back.
Good question. All right, so if there are no answers, again, thank you, John, so much for being with us. Thank you, Andover TV, for being here. And thank you to everyone who joined in. We hope to see you at more of our events. And stay safe out in the snow. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.